welcome to Show Studio. It's a very sad day because it's our last Haute Couture panel discussion of the season. But it's also a good day because we're going to be talking about the Vionnet show, the Demi Couture show, which is designed by the absolutely amazing Shonagh. It's also a good day because we have this amazing mural growing behind us, which is being sort of constructed both on and off camera by Stephen Doherty, which is absolutely beautiful, and it's showing some of the couture that we've seen this week, so Schiaparelli, Margiela that we saw this morning, and then Chanel and Dior. It's also good because we're sat on some very couture themed fabric. This is from the J'adore Dior advert that Nick Knight shot with Charlize Theron. We're all sat upon it. And I've also got an amazing set of women sat upon said fabric to talk about what's going on at Vionnet. But before we kick off, it'd be great if you guys could introduce yourselves, starting with you, Oriole.
I'm Oriole Cullen, and I'm a fashion curator at the Vionnet Museum.
I'm Deborah Milner, and I'm a couture designer.
I'm Shonagh Marshall, and I'm a fashion curator also at Somerset House.
Let's start by talking a little bit about the original Vionnet. Do you have Vionnet in the archives? How much Vionnet at the Vionnet?
Yeah, it's always a tongue twister. Yeah, we have a lot of pieces, and of course really strong pieces from the 30s, which I think is sort of seen as her kind of flowering, and, her sort of golden period. So,
and tell me what strikes you the most about those pieces. Is it the construction? Is it the what is it that's so fantastic about them?
I mean, she really was a fantastic designer, and I think it's the technical approach that she's always challenging herself to kind of work in a new way. And of course people sort of reference a bias cut fabrics, but actually there's a lot more innovation, and her sort of trying to do away with seams and things like that is really quite amazing what she does, and also how she consistently wanted to reinvent what she was doing. So she was really obsessed with people copying her work, and really hated that, and she also pushed herself every season to do something new. But the amazing thing about the garments is they're just so light, there's nothing to them, and I think that's what's really impressive, because visually they really have such clout, but actually when you hold them and you feel them, there's really nothing to them. So they're incredibly wearable too. It's
interesting that you talk about sort of that progressive approach that she had, because I'm interested, do you guys see parallels between her and Shonagh? Because I know when he first sort of got appointed into that position to design the Demi Couture, he made these parallels, obviously, as you would do. But do you see that? Do you think it's an appropriate fit for the house?
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting fit, because obviously he's known for his invention, especially in cutting and approaching things from a different angle. So I think it's a very interesting combination, really. And Vionnet was so incredibly modern at the time when she invented the bias cut, and it was a really new way of dressing. And what's amazing is even if you take those pieces today, they still look totally contemporary.
Yeah, it's just that lightness, because that, even today you see couture can look so outdated because it is that heaviness. And to be so modern at that time. Is it someone that's really inspired you in your work?
Yes, I think so, in as much as, I do like to keep a certain lightness in whatever I'm doing, and to sort of eliminate as far as possible either seams or heavy backing fabrics, etc., etc. So I'd say from that point of view, yes, not necessarily visually, but more the approach.
Shonagh, what's your take on what's going on? Are you a fan of Hussein's work?
Yeah, I am very much. I'm quite interested at the moment, not that I know anything about it, but the technology is changing our lives, obviously. That's a big subject, and with Digital Revolution opening at Barbican, I think he really paved the way in what he carved out, and it's really exciting, the kind of wizardry he has achieved. So if you take what Oriole said and apply that in terms of innovation, there is a real relationship there. I think there's such a nice synergy, and I wasn't really shocked when they announced. I think there's something about the sort of fit, it just seemed to work. I don't know if this is, I'm definitely not a Shonagh expert in the sense that I've really deeply gone into his work, but I think there is a lightness of touch there, even when he's using technology. I think it's almost the way that you view it on the body. It sort of doesn't interfere. I don't know, it sort of works. So yeah, I think there would be a relationship, because some people have said there isn't.
Yeah, I don't really get that.
I didn't. I haven't really heard that.
I thought there was.
Yeah. Maybe they're thinking of purely visually what Shonagh does and what Vionnet did, and therefore think that there isn't a synergy. But actually, if you look at the understanding beneath what he does,
and the paring down, I think the simplicity as well is really.
I think it would be a little pedestrian to look at their designs and, you know, say for example Galliano, who was also a king of the slip dress, if he'd have, you know, it would have been a very different thing, but if he'd have gone to Vionnet, then that would have almost been, it would have been a different thing, but it wouldn't have been as exciting in a sense if you're expecting a million slip dresses. Then
would have been too much bias cut for it.
not that Galliano really does the slip dress since the 90s, but you know, as example. But
his approach is something different anyway. He brings the whole sort of fantasy and storytelling into it, and obviously interesting cuts, but it's coming from a different place.
Yeah, completely different.
It's not so much about paring down.
And innovation in the same way of sort of technology, or getting rid of a seam, or looking at that construction. But yeah, I think there is really interesting things, and movement I think is really interesting.
Yeah, I think that's really important to mention, you know, this idea of movement, and I think that synergy between, as you were saying, kind of the focus on garment rather than the focus on story, which I think, you know, with Hussein there are always these constant stories, you know, whether it's immigration, travel, all these different things that he explores, but I think the focus is very much on how pieces move, what they like, how they're cut, which is interesting. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, and it's that for always looking to the future, or you know, never really looking back. And I think they're both the same in that sense.
And it's great as well. Just I think it's important to mention. It's so nice to see a designer like that champion, because a lot of people talk about Hussein as this kind of, you know, I don't think he's the unsung hero, but I think he's always struggled to find a place and has struggled financially because of it, and he's such a talented designer, but perhaps hasn't always been particularly fortunate commercially or financially. So it's really, really great to see someone like that rewarded.
Be given that opportunity, I think. That's well deserved.
Yeah, completely.
And it's really interesting too that he is just doing the couture, the Demi couture, because I don't think there's any other house that just has, you know, has a different ready-to-wear team and a different couture team. So that's, I think, really, I'm, you know, excited to see what he's done.
Do you think that's a bit of a worry in some ways, though, because, you know, with a designer as talented as Hussein, it's always tricky when he's going to be doing these great things at Demi Couture, and I think his first season was incredibly impressive, incredibly beautiful, and that's going to be very different to what's going on at the ready-to-wear. And obviously that's headed up by Gogo Ashkenazi herself, who doesn't come from a design background. Would we rather have seen him given the whole thing, or is it quite nice just to see him kind of in the slightly more sort of experimental area that he can do while at Couture? You know, is this laboratory that we talk about?
Well, I think it's quite a novel approach, because of course he's quite established with his own company and he has his own work. So I imagine, I mean, I don't know, but I imagine taking the whole thing on would have been something maybe that was too much. So, and I, you know, can see that there must be some, you know, collaboration and, you know, I think teams working together so that it isn't a completely different language.
And also if Gogo is, you know, starting out in this sort of field, then maybe she also wouldn't want to do the whole thing.
The whole thing, yeah. It's interesting, isn't it? Because they're an odd match in some ways. You know, she's a really intriguing figure. She's, as you said, she doesn't come from a fashion background. She ran sort of an oil and gas company, and then, you know, incredibly wealthy, purchased Vionnet. And I think in a way it's sad, because I think she's had a fair amount of backlash because of, you know, she's trying her hand at designing, as a lot of people say. But then it's going back to what we were saying before. It's great that she has entrusted someone like Hussein Shonagh. You know, she's clearly trying to surround herself with a very. And
you never know, do you? Because I mean, Victoria Beckham's done very well, considering everybody was incredibly sceptical when she started out. So.
Let's talk about this process of sort of reviving houses in the way that we're seeing, you know, where someone comes in, they buy an old name and revive it. You know, you guys work a lot with historical fashion. Do you find it quite frustrating, or is it quite great to see all these houses suddenly sort of reopening? You know, Schiaparelli, Vionnet.
I think they're very different, aren't they? Because some of them have had continuous, you know, histories, where some of them have been gone, like Schiaparelli and Vionnet, and there's a big gap. So it's something completely new and exciting. And there is no one way of doing it. I mean, I think when you look at someone like Riccardo Tisci at Givenchy, you know, he has really just made that such an incredibly successful label, but it's really his own language.
Yeah.
And so there's sort of you tend to think of Givenchy, although again it has a continuous history, as you two, sort of Hubert de Givenchy and then Riccardo Tisci.
Yeah.
But then you get someone like Karl Lagerfeld at Chanel, who's, you know, consistently reinventing that DNA, whatever. So I think, I think it's interesting to see how people play around with that and how they reinterpret archives and you know, the sort of codes of a house. But I don't think there's any one way of doing it.
No.
Yeah. Why is there so much focus on that, like the heritage houses though? You know, because we're really seeing it seems to have a lot of currency at the moment rather than...
I don't know. Do they already have perfumes or anything, or did they have nothing at the point they restarted?
Most of them have, I guess, well, they have the heritage of the perfumes. I guess it could be real. I'm sure we'll see Shocking coming back, you know, for Schiaparelli. But I'm just intrigued.
Maybe it's because if someone like Goga Ashkenazi wanted to start a couture house, it's easier to take an established name and then build on it. And you have kind of a reference point than to start completely from scratch.
Completely.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is, if you look at somebody like Uliana Sergenko, and then, you know, it's a very different thing. It's much harder, I think, to
And you're
start.
immediately going to get the interest.
Yeah.
Because the name kind of resonates.
And you do have this reference that people can call on. So it's a sort of instant story.
Yeah.
I think the history is important, but it was interesting with the first collection Schlein did. He said that he didn't delve into the archives in the way that a lot of designers do that, and that's their starting process, be it for their own label. They probably spend a lot of time. Do you have designers come to the Vionnet often, cloth workers? And I think that's a really interesting and fascinating process in itself. But you wouldn't be invited to those levels of Vionnet if you weren't under that name, which is interesting actually. It's very old-fashioned really, because it's not the merit of your new work, it's just the fact that you're dining out on this name.
On this name, exactly.
I'm quite obsessed with Charles James being purchased.
Yeah, talk to me about that.
Has he been purchased?
Yeah,
Harvey
Weinstein. Yeah.
Oh my goodness, do you think he's going to put in... for who? Georgina Graham?
Yes!
Yeah.
So I'm obsessed with that. I think that's fabulous.
But it's fabulous, but it's also scary, I think, that, you know, a house can just be kind of, as you say, snapped up as a present.
And that's why she's interesting, Goya. Sorry, I can't say his surname.
Goya Ashkenazi.
Ashkenazi. She's a businesswoman, and often you hear of young designers, and this is very different to what we're talking about today, couture, but young designers graduating and they don't have the business acumen to make it work. It almost becomes a cash flow problem, and I think that's a real shame, and it's almost an inherent thing within you if you are that kind of person who understands how to make things work, or you're not. So actually someone like Harvey Weinstein or Goya, they are able to look at something as a whole and a brand, build it, sustain it. And I mean, a lot of people say, I read a review, her deep pockets, her symbol of her deep pockets, and I think that's a bit crass, because many of the design houses have ridiculously deep pockets.
It doesn't mean it's
Chanel.
going to be good.
I mean, it's not Karl Lagerfeld's deep pockets, it's Chanel's, but it doesn't mean it's going to be good or bad. And they cost a fortune, all of these pieces that you see. So I think it's really interesting. And I'm interested to see how that progresses, because it feels like there's a lot of it at the moment.
Yeah,
perhaps
it really
one
does.
started and then... But I know that Vionnet don't have their own archive as a brand.
Do they not?
No.
Gosh, I'm surprised. Do you think they maybe start one?
No, and I think they are trying to. I know that there was a really interesting project that Alistair O'Neill worked on with his students, and to build up the histories and the stories and get people's opinions for the brand Vionnet, because they want to have that to sort of to play upon and to build into the brand, which is you know, is obvious, and you know what you would want to do. But I think I'm just interested to see the work, because Schiaparelli I think is an interesting one, because I think it's going to grow. It's not necessarily completely there, and I quite like that process. You're not always perfect from your first
collection.
I
It's interesting what you say about buying stuff back, just because we had Kerry Taylor from Kerry Taylor Auctions on our Dior panel, and she said that, you know, she's seeing so much of that where designers are coming in and buying pieces, and the houses are just trying to buy stuff back so much. And it must be incredibly interesting when you've got archives at the V&A and when you're working with historical fashion, to see kind of that new focus on really trying to have stuff back and trying to give designers access to those kind of archives, because it's so important, isn't it? And I think it perhaps hasn't been prioritised so much. Like, even, I keep bringing this up because I spent a whole day with them, but I was with Medium Kirchhoff, and they didn't keep anything up to a certain point, and then Edward said it literally hit me one day that I had given away the only pieces I had, so they meticulously keep everything. But it's quite scary to think, that a house like Vionnet doesn't have their own archive. Do you think that's quite common though?
Yeah, I mean, about 10 years ago, a lot of the bigger companies started realising, and companies that are sort of in business, how important their archives are. I mean, people like Calvin Klein have always been very good at that, but in general, it's a huge project, and I think a lot of them have woken up to that, and people like Gucci have opened their museum, and so suddenly people realise the value in their archives.
But a lot of them keep it very closed off, which is it's interesting they mentioned that Gucci example, or even Ferragamo have done an amazing thing in Florence at the moment of showing off all their old pieces from their archive, with their old shoes. It's amazing, and with the museum exactly. But then a lot of the houses do keep their archive incredibly private. Even the designers themselves can't sometimes get to it. Yeah. Why do you think that is?
I think that a lot of the time it's in-house as a design resource, and it's sort of a closed thing because people can reference it. And I know one company in particular, that the design team are always calling things from the archive, and they're requesting that. So they see it as their sort of tranche of inspiration and their sort of things. But I think in general people know now that there is a lot of value in an archive. And in one garment there's so many different suggestions and things. So I think it's just realising the importance of that.
Do you have houses trying to buy stuff back off institutions like yourselves?
Well, we would never, once we acquire something, it's kind of all in trust. So it's not for sale. But certainly it's very interesting to being in touch with people, and Kerry, obviously, things coming up for sale, and where the market will be sort of led sometimes by what's coming up and knowing who's looking for what, and that's
so you're battling off with different
I know.
It's really interesting tracing sort of the life of these garments. I actually interned with Kerry.
Really?
Years ago. Yeah,
she's fantastic.
So we used to take all the pictures on the mannequins that go on the website. I mean, scary. I'm not a photographer, but it's really interesting to see the treatment of them in that way. It's commercial space. I've never worked or seen the inner workings of, say, something like Christie's, but I'd imagine it would be quite similar. Put them on the mannequin, you make them look lovely. They're actually there for a very short space of time. They're going to be bought by someone, be it a private collector. There's all range of things. But, sometimes the Vionnet or the brand will be bidding on these pieces. And then once they enter the Vionnet, we know very well that the care and attention, the conservation, but it's to be shared with the world. Your collection is, in that sense, it's sort of the nation's.
Absolutely.
You consider it in that sense, so it's to be exhibited as and when that arises. But in the sense, the brand, it is quite secretive in some cases, and I find that really interesting because in what we do, curation, it's supposed to be seen on the body, but you're ultimately taking it off. But it could be bought by someone who wanted to wear it in their house. Then there's that. I think the life of a garment is so interesting in that way, and how it got there. And actually, working with someone like Kerry Taylor, that then again is quite secretive. The purchaser is not allowed to be, it's not allowed to be disclosed. And I think I don't know how she acquired it, who's selling it. I think it's all fascinating, and that's a whole another kind of level to collecting clothing.
Yeah. Do you find that when you're putting on exhibitions at someone's house with people, do you tend to know who the big collectors are, and are there some that are really sort of unhelpful with lending? Do most people tend to be quite open with it? How does it work for you guys?
Well, it's such an interesting place because we don't have a collection.
Exactly.
And I always like to say it's the most brilliant thing and the most awful thing all at the same time. I really miss the objects in a way, because I worked in archives for a long time. So, just being with these pieces, getting to know them without trying to know them is a really wonderful experience. But I think that we've had big scale exhibitions that have relied upon one big archive. Be it Valentino, it was the brand's archive. And then we had a few more loans, only a couple in that show. And then Isabella Blow Fashion Galore was obviously Daphne purchased Isabella Blow collection, so that was the big source. But we did ask many others for that, including Alexander McQueen, who really, really were helpful actually. But I think it's a big consideration for a brand and for a museum, and it's something I've been thinking a lot about lately. Sometimes museums don't have the infrastructure to be able to agree to a loan because the process that it requires is quite lengthy in terms of admin. And I think something like the Vionnet or the Met, for example, even struggle with that. I think you can talk much more about it with first-hand experience, which I don't have, but it's something I've been talking a lot with Amy Delahaye about, and that sort of the want and the generosity to show these pieces, but the inability to actually make it quite work. And conservation is so time consuming and expensive if you want to mount something that's older and it's not in a state to be on a mannequin. Which really it takes a very long time.
I can imagine actually.
Isabella Blow, I think, was it was 6 months flat out conservation.
I mean, that's what's so amazing, just on another note, with that collection that Daphne's bought in, it's going to be a resource for the students at St Martin's, and I think that's a wonderful thing, because that could inspire a whole generation of students.
Exactly.
So, and they probably wouldn't get the opportunity to look at all those garments so easily if it wasn't for something like that. That's what I find so interesting
about cloth workers that you have at the Vionnet as well, because when I did the tour of it, when they let sort of press come around and see it, they talked about pieces that they'd had, sort of popular pieces that regional museums or sort of small galleries wanted to show often. They'd had them sort of framed to try and cut down the costs and really help with lending, which I thought was a really amazing thing to do, because that's something that I think it's a completely different side of fashion that you perhaps, when you have the pace of the shows and especially when it's ready to wear season, you perhaps don't think about where are the designers getting their inspiration from, how is the public getting to see historical fashion, and it is such a big side of it. But I'm interested, do you find it when you hear that something like, Vionnet are trying to buy back their archive, does it set alarm bells a little bit when you think, well, if they're trying to get it, how are we going to get stuff, or is that a bit too simplistic?
I think the size of our archive, it's very large, and I think that, strategically you have to look at what you have and what you need in order to sustain showing that or using it as a resource, rather than sort of wildly buying everything that comes up. And realistically speaking, funding wise, we have to make decisions all the time. So and also because it's always been actually a museum of contemporary, it's always been collecting the contemporary at the time, there's also all of that to deal with too. So it depends. I mean, a lot of our acquisitions might be exhibition led, or they might be led by projects and things. I could sit all day and talk. But I was actually interested to ask you, Deborah, if you have an archive,
I do actually, yes.
Yeah.
There's a few things from earlier on that I didn't keep before, when I sort of thought, I'm just going to sell it and get some money. And then actually, for about the last 15 years, I've kept the key pieces, just so I've got them, really.
And space, because I'm always talking with designers about their own archives, and I'm just interested.
Well, you do. I mean, to sort of keep it properly, you do need a lot of space. I mean, my archive's not that big because I do other things as well, and obviously work with other designers too. But I mean, as you probably know, the McQueen archive is huge. So
yes, massive.
and actually, I'm sure they won't mind me saying
this. It's a huge space, like sort of square footage as well. Yeah. And it's so expensive to keep things in a correct
to keep
way.
And especially now, obviously, there's a real onus on the company and the brand to make sure that they do preserve all those pieces. But what's amazing is that they've got really the archive going right back to when Lee started, and there's only a few gaps. Most of it's there.
Yeah. And did you find it interesting with the Isabella Blow collection, kind of being reunited with these pieces that you didn't know she had, or did you know she had those pieces?
Well, I didn't know she had everything, obviously. I think the weirdest thing was seeing pieces, particularly in the circular room, that you could remember Isabella wearing. Yeah. So that was quite, poignant seeing that.
We'll have to share what she's got.
Pardon?
Of yours.
Oh?
Yeah, we'll have to, because I don't know if Daphne ever has, but there's there's a good few pieces in there, not just the red coats, the amazing red coat.
There's probably not so much in Isabella's collection, I'd say, because I think I said once before that I used to make a lot of things for Isabella for shoots, but not many clothes for her. She used to tell me I was very mean because I wouldn't give her anything. Mostly because I was either trying to make money or keeping it.
So what happens if you made her stuff for shoots? Would you then take that back afterwards?
Well, often they'd be things that she wouldn't necessarily wear, like you know, a see-through dress made of net, or I made like things of skirts made of, you know, film strips and things like that. So they weren't necessarily things she was going to wear.
Sure.
So it depended.
Have you kept most of those?
Most of them.
That's amazing.
Yeah, some I don't have, but.
And with someone like Hussein's archive, because you said you buy contemporary stuff as well, have you got a lot of Hussein stuff as well?
We have a few pieces, and I wish we had more, you know, but we have a few interesting pieces.
Because his archive must be quite diverse, obviously, because he works in such a multidisciplinary way. You know, his archive is not just the clothes, it's the kind of installation pieces of film and all that kind of aspect.
Yeah, and I thought the exhibition of his was really great, you know, because you had sort of mini versions of all those collections.
It was really good. I was talking to someone about that the other day who was saying how great it was, and they weren't a fashion person at all.
Yeah.
And I think it really captured people's imagination.
Yeah, it was great.
People who didn't know that he was doing all this amazing stuff, and I love the catwalk shows in the exhibition. We just showed how these pieces moved.
Yeah, I think those films were fantastic.
Really? I didn't see that. Did you do a whole exhibition?
No, it wasn't. No, nothing to do with me. I was a visitor. Yeah, it was at the Design Museum.
It travelled. I mean, it started at the Groningen Museum and I remember going to see it there, and I think it had 5 venues maybe. It was at the Musée de la Mode as well.
It was in Paris, yeah.
Oh, that sounds really interesting.
It was good. It was really great, but I guess that was his archive.
Yeah.
In the most part.
Yeah.
So it's good. Maybe 5 years ago.
Right.
I saw it in Design Museum, I think.
Yeah, it was really, really amazing. But it's interesting with someone like Hussein, because as much as, you know, it's the same. I love that exhibition for both the catwalk shows, but also because he's got such a broad range. But then in a way, and I know it's awful, that's what's held him back, I think, in some ways. You know, some of his peers who've been much more sort of single-minded in where they wanted to be and have just focused on fashion and haven't been so sort of, I think, intellectually curious, have perhaps found themselves with the sort of the safer, more better paid position. And because with Hussein, you know, he's so, I think, so driven by what he believes in and by what he finds intriguing and interesting. I think that's in a way, it's such a shame that you can't be that sort of open-minded.
It almost makes it even more valuable, because especially nowadays where everybody is so business-minded,
so careerist
has to be
as
in
well.
order to get on, it's actually even more valuable to have someone like Hussein doing something that's really from the heart and totally what he believes in, and not compromising.
Because it does send a scary message when someone as talented as that, you know, has, you know, struggled with bankruptcy and, you know, had to rely so heavily on sort of having to do these projects to keep his. I find it so, because I think he's one of probably my favourite. I think he's absolutely incredible, and it sends a scary message, I think, to students. You know, that you have to be so focused, and you can't, you know, explore film for a while.
I guess you just have to decide what your priority is.
Yeah,
and that's it really. And then you don't know. There's always elements of luck.
Yeah,
you know, being in the right place at the right time, or you fitting the bill for something.
And he's never really engaged with celebrity culture or that kind of a thing, which I think has become such a big part of building a young label as well. You know, it's very. Yeah. Before we look at the collection, I want to pick your brains on something different, because we were talking about it before we went live. Can we talk a bit about Demi Couture and what that means?
Well, as far as I understand, and also talking to Oriole, it's less fittings, and I presume that there's a piece that exists and they choose that piece and maybe make a couple of alterations, and then the fitting process, I imagine they only have 1 or 2, whereas in couture you might have between 3 and 6 typically. And I imagine there's a lot less sort of handwork in terms of, you know, the embellishment, etc., etc.
Because you said that was what had been said for, you know, Gugu had spoken about, you know, how she doesn't have that much time and busy women don't want to have to attend sort of 6 fittings. Is that correct?
Yeah, and I think it's interesting looking at, because there's been a lot about this season, the young couture client. Yeah. And we were just talking earlier about sort of, again, going back to Vionnet in the 30s, where if you were, you know, a sort of socialite or a woman who wore couture, you spent a lot of your time in fittings. You know, the whole start of the season was just going to fittings, going to find your accessories, going to get your hats. I mean, it was a full-time job.
Isn't it?
And I think it's even become a problem in couture that people don't want to, and definitely I've come across it quite a lot, people don't want to do the fittings.
But that's interesting.
And then you're trying to work out how you're going to make this couture dress with less fittings but still give, you know, make something as amazing.
So what do you find women, do they want to email their measurements, or they don't want to have to...
Yeah, maybe want to email the measurements, maybe they're only going to be available for one set of fittings, which is really not enough for that sort of dress.
Sure.
So you risk it not being perfect, but you have to deal with it because...
And why do you think they want couture then if they don't have that? Do you think it's...
Well, somehow I think they expect that you're still going to be able to make it look as fabulous as if they had their 6 fittings, and then they probably won't understand if it didn't at the end. So this is the dilemma.
Do you think that it has to do with things getting more global? You know, it's just practically harder for the kind of clients who are buying couture to get to...
It's probably a lack of understanding about the making process as well.
That's interesting.
So, and maybe it also depends on the type of design, what the garment's for. So
it's wonderful to think of a day where it was just kind of, it was 6 fittings and all that time. It's kind of quite wonderful. I know, like, it's obviously great to see Hussein doing this, but you kind of wish it was not demi couture, like haute couture, because there's something quite poetic about it. But
well, maybe it's, you know, in a way, it maybe won't look that different. I mean, I can't imagine him doing something that was really sort of beading encrusted. I mean, maybe he would, but I mean, he's always had a very modern approach. So maybe this is a more modern approach if you want to look at it like that. So.
Can I ask, with your clients, are you finding, you know, we've discussed a lot on the panels that, you know, the clients who are really engaging with couture, it is either they're from Asia or they're from Russia or even South America, you know, Brazil. Are you finding that, or are most of your clients still European? Or I don't know how to ask that.
I think I do quite a lot of European clients, but I think it does depend particularly on what sort of designs you do and maybe the price bracket as well. But there are a lot of clients from the Middle East. I would have thought that in any couture house they're going to form quite a huge
Are you seeing that when you look at the collections? Are you seeing how those tastes or those cultures changing?
I suppose when I looked at something like the Valentino couture collection last season, you could see in kind of some of the looser shapes that maybe they were catering for that.
Yeah, that's
but
interesting.
I think it depends on the designer really. Maybe they don't show everything in the collection.
And I think a lot of things often, a lot of the clients will cover up over their couture, so their friends and, you know, their family will see it, but not necessarily. And sometimes, you know, it's quite the dramatic pieces that were chosen.
God, why would you cover up couture? It's such an interesting
world.
world.
What about the sales for the first Vionnet? I have no idea.
I don't think they've released their sales figures. I think they've kept it quite guarded.
Because it was cheaper as well. Demi couture. It was. I mean, I read this that it was. I mean, it was cheaper. It was starting at £10,000 instead of hundreds of thousands. But I mean, I thought that was quite interesting because.
Well, you can buy a £10,000 dress on Net-a-Porter.
It does give a different. It opens it up to a different clientele. It really does. And maybe that's younger, but maybe it's. I don't know who that person is, but that is significantly lower.
I think there'd be a lot of people who could. Well, a lot of people. I'm sure that would attract quite a lot of people. And I think it's from that point of view, it's a good thing.
And that's going back to what we were saying about sort of Goga's background and her business work. It's interesting because, and you said, Shonagh, people are being quite dismissive and perhaps, you know, referring to her deep pockets and stuff. But then you think, you know, actually she's going to bring the clients as well because that's her social circle. In a way, fashion's kind of cutting off its nose despite its face and being very snooty about these kind of rich business people entering fashion, because as much as you love the idea of the kind of, you know, the struggling designer who gets the opportunity to make it, and that needs to be such an important part of fashion, you do need these people who have that business side.
Yes, you do, definitely.
Because I think that's something that you don't have enough in fashion, and it does, you know, going back to what we're saying about Hussein, it does hinder people's success. And
I think the demi couture is quite a clever move really, because if you look at how so many things are immediately ripped off and on the high street and actually really good, then you know, so people who have a bit of money maybe want to get something a bit different, and so getting demi couture, they're not having to have all the fittings, they're not having to necessarily have something so laborious in terms of labour and the way that it might look, then get something lighter and modern but still have it tailored to them, or maybe a bit different. I mean, I don't know what sort of limits there are in terms of how many they sell of a certain design, for example. Because obviously in couture you wouldn't expect to sell more than 2 or 3 dresses, probably.
Should we see what he's done for this season? I was going to say, we're probably going to see tons of embellishment now, loads of princess dresses, and have to eat everything we said.
That's usually the way, isn't it?
This is interesting, the circle from last season in that second look there, you can kind of see echoes of that, the way he did that circular.
I love that circular.
Yeah, it was very, I thought technically that was brilliant. The
very
way
interesting.
Yeah.
But that, I thought it was a very quiet way of showing off your technical skills. You know, couture often is that kind of throw as much onto it as you can, and to do something that showed off a technique so simply, I thought was really lovely. And you know, the show notes that we've got, they focus a lot on dualities. That kind of contrast and duality is the thing for this collection. So, you know, wrong, right, private, public, outside, inside, wet, dry, night, day, are all mentioned, summer, winter. But it is this real idea of sort of blurring boundaries and contrast, which perhaps we'll see. It's always hard to know with show notes whether it's just kind of some odd poem that you're given.
Oh wow, that's incredible.
She almost looks like she's been attacked with some kind of weapon though and is gushing blood.
Death becomes her.
It's interesting actually, number 3, it's a lot more traditionally feminine than I would expect perhaps. I think it's perhaps that sort of corsage that she's got on her shoulder.
Number 4 is really interesting. I don't know if I like it, but I think it's a very interesting idea.
It'd be interesting to know what that fabric was, not the red. The white.
Because it looks like
lace or
it looks like it's lace that's then been beaded as
well.
well.
It does look like there's some beads. Oh god.
It does, yeah.
It's interesting that you say, you know, I don't particularly like it, but I'm intrigued by it, because I think that's something that all the best designers do. You know, you don't like it, but you
do later.
Yeah,
exactly. A season or 2 down the line.
And that feels really new, number 4 as well. That
it does.
No one's done it.
No one's done that, and you're kind of like, well, maybe that's a good thing that no one's done it, but also like
it is different. It stands out, you know, immediately. The sort of portholes are. It's a kind of mad idea, but it's really interesting.
And you also,
wasn't the circle about dressmaking in the last collection? It was about processes, stripping those back. So it's almost like they've been stripped back, but then added on to. I don't know.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Progress that idea.
Yeah, it's gone from being sort of an ethos to being an emblem. That's quite interesting. I also wonder if there's a bigger story to that dress. For example, if you didn't have to have. If you could choose how much of the underlayer was pulled out or revealed, because it does look like there's lots of layers to that.
I'm sure you could if you were buying it.
Yeah, which is quite interesting. But it reminds me of sorry to keep talking about number 4. Markin's like bored of that one now. It reminds me, you know, of a lot of the earlier work that he's done, you know, where you'd see these pieces that would go from being long and shrink up into a hat, or even just like the table skirt. It's awful to bring that up because it's such a lazy Hussein example. But this idea of things transforming and going from being long to short, or turning from one garment to the other, that kind of comes through in that, this idea that you can transform a piece. And even that circle, I think that's a very Hussein thing, you know, dresses turning into aeroplane and that kind of a thing. It's all. I think that's slightly inferred by that idea of transforming your clothes. Sorry, you can go on in that one.
It's difficult to see them.
Yeah.
That one in the end.
Sculpture.
Oh, it looks really interesting. I can't actually see it.
Oh wow. So he's sort of using a blocking technique, like he would on hats or something, and that's what it looks like there.
It's very structured, pleating, which is
three-dimensional.
interesting.
Yeah. And all full-length gowns.
But I do like, you know, they talked about juxtapositions, but I think number 8, that's really interesting to see something that looks quite hard and quite techy against something very flowing. And
yeah.
It was quite traditional in a way, as you said. It was all full oh my God, lost the ability to speak. Full-length gowns.
Yeah. I suppose that's what sells.
I guess
what people are going to buy
for Demi Couture as well. Yeah.
Or cocktail gowns.
Yeah.
I think I'm so out of fashion, but I just so miss the spectacle, because I spend a lot of time watching 90s catwalk show videos. So I think that it's, I don't know how you all feel, but wouldn't it be a bit interesting to see some other presentation instead of some sort of underlit catwalk?
Yeah,
people walking down it. I don't know. Maybe
well, maybe this is a kind of backlash against having so much theatricality and everything being so over the top.
But I think Hussein always did incredible presentation. They weren't theatrical in the Galliano sense.
No,
they weren't kind of. But they were
like
just
a play.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
Conceptual.
Or just
theatre.
Crazy, putting microphones and things and putting.
Or like the technology.
Yeah, exactly.
I sort of miss that, but that's me. I like a bit of theatre.
Yeah.
But I wonder why that's not on the cards here, because it wasn't in the last show. And
he doesn't do it so much
with
with
the budget behind you, you might consider playing with as you had once done, but maybe that's like an old. That's why I say maybe he's moved on from that. I'm not doing that.
But I
anymore.
love that with Hussein, and you think he did it so smartly.
That looks like a sort of sheared fur.
He's got beaver and mink in there, so. I think number 10 is interesting, that twist, because it's almost, again, it's that kind of relatively unflattering. It looks like she's trying on, it's kind of again hinting at the technique thing that we were talking about. It's like she's trying on multiple dresses, it's being draped on her and being worked on the body.
I thought it worked really well on number 9 with it. Sorry, that short. I could see that being a really popular dress. It looks very very contemporary, easy to wear kind of, and I think that twist works well there. Maybe for me rather than
number 10. I quite like that coat. I think that's quite fabulous.
Which
number
one?
11.
I don't like that.
Do you not like that? I think it's kind of.
I think it looks like a onesie.
I think that's kind of the way she's walking hasn't helped that, because it means it looks
very
like she's wearing
expensive. I like the shoes actually.
Yeah. I'm a bit of a sucker for anything furry or fuzzy.
It's a teddy bear. It really is. It's
quite
cozy.
huggable. I do like the simplicity of it though, because it's interesting. I say this after having looked at all the couture shows and talked, similarly to you, Shonagh, about missing that kind of, that opulence, I guess, in a way, and that theatricality. But there's something about the purity here that feels very authentic. On some other runways, I wonder if people are doing stuff that feels minimal or androgynous or sporty because they feel like it's a trend, and that kind of frustrates me. But when you see it here, it just does feel very much of being about what he does.
It's interesting with the pleats, because actually I think that is something that since Goga Ashkenazi has been in charge, that's something that's come out every season, this pleated fabric that she is really sort of making.
I wonder how involved she is in the couture collection in terms of what sort of things
Well, last
she
season
shows.
they took their bow together, didn't they? Which I think was quite interesting.
Because the models look quite like her, don't they? In a way. And the way they've got the long hair. And
that's true.
So when I was just thinking about that, I wonder if she is also involved. Because
she must be to an extent.
Did the fuss.
That one's interesting, 16.
Yeah. She did the bow, that's what I saw.
They've talked in the show notes about this idea of movement being frozen in cloth, which I do think is quite Hussein, who's always been interested in movement.
I like that one, 17.
They're like
skeletons
almost coming out of like a backbone.
But it is interesting, the idea of that could be a shape that's caused by her walking and then it's kind of been captured. I think that's quite interesting.
Well, the idea of movement was always so important in the original with modern contemporary dance and Isadora Duncan, and that's really interesting to look at that and wonder what it looked like static.
I like the repetition. It looks like some of the pieces we're seeing have been turned inside out from previous pieces we've seen. That gold that we're seeing there was the lining on that dress that was almost exactly the same as that, and that's quite interesting. It's almost, again, I think this is a lot about Hussein's codes as well. Transformation, as we said, is a big part of what he does, and 17, it almost looks like that's, if you look at 17 and 19 together, it's almost like that dress has kind of morphed into, and that's quite interesting.
I wonder what that is, complete pleating, because it looks like a print from here, but it's maybe
it is.
Do you think
it is pleated? Yeah,
it's amazing.
That's incredible. Telephone directory.
Exactly. Yeah.
Can we see the next bit?
This sort of moulded almost fabric on the number 20 on the bodice is quite similar to the
God, are we under attack? That's quite terrifying. Sorry, you were saying.
Just similar to the resort collection too. We were talking earlier about is there a correlation between the ready-to-wear and the couture? But so it's that sort of metallic kind of creased fabric. There was a lot of that.
It's interesting. I'm sure she has, as we said, set her parameters of this is what I see the vision to be, and I just wonder how much. Again, so they take their bow together.
Yeah, she would do anyway. I mean, if she's designing the ready-to-wear, she's definitely going to want to influence the Demi Couture, I would have thought. Well, if she wasn't designing at all, it would be different, but I think the fact that she is.
Can we see some of the close-ups?
So really no day wear. I mean, obviously it's a small collection, and as you were saying, it's the evening wear.
It's only 20 looks. It's really small.
Really, really small. Yeah. But we saw that as well. At Margiela, it was 22 look.
Was it? I think it makes sense when you're starting out as well. Less than that, you don't quite have a collection, but more than that, it's an
Chanel's like 75, and you do kind of.
I loved it.
Yeah.
No, I think if you can afford to do it, it's fantastic. But I'm just thinking about the investment.
Yeah.
Why not? We can all wear embellished cycling shorts, can't we?
I don't think it would look like
I was looking at the McQueen, I think it was the spring-summer 2014, you know, with one with all the little checks.
Yeah.
I didn't realise it was all beaded. I thought, my goodness, it looks more like a couture collection. When you look at the workmanship in it, it was...
It's incredible. Number 4 is interesting because that looks like pleat, but actually I can't work out if that's kind of
fringing
like
or
string, fringing, exactly, Which
maybe it's pleats with string over it. That's what it looks like.
Yeah. It does invite you to want to try and touch the pieces, which is nice because I feel like some of the couture we've seen doesn't have that kind of tactile effect.
I mean, if I'm honest, I'm not crazy about it, but I think it is there's some very interesting pieces there. I mean, particularly these kind of reptilian pieces.
And for you, I think probably the techniques and things. Do you think they look like very advanced? I mean, pattern cutting wise and layering the pleating. I think it's a
Are they blocked?
Under pressure.
They look like they're blocked over something.
They could be, or it could be 3D printing.
Just here,
I think if they'd used 3D printing, they probably would have made more of a thing.
Yeah.
But then you don't know.
It's probably like some kind of origami.
Looks like.
Especially if it's pleated. As you say, maybe it has been blocked over something.
Yeah, that looks especially very structured, like it has
That's
been blocked.
interesting when you can see the back of it.
Yeah.
But it does look very different, which I think is a good thing. It's positive.
And I wonder if perhaps this isn't, it's a new house, and it's not a new house, but in many ways. And I wonder if, part of his role here is about creating a new visual language for Vionnet and less about, trying to actually invite in clients that much or sell much of the Demi Couture. It's more about...
It's probably a bit of both.
It said in the notes that there's animal skin, reptile skin. Is that skirt back there?
I wonder if number 13, I think it looks like it's meant to be wet, because he's talked in the notes about wet and dry, which is quite interesting because it's almost like things in a stage of being made. Because that does look like it's been rained on, which is quite interesting. I think it's quite funny, even the couture client, despite all her money, the weather will still rain on her. What's your take on it, Oriole? It's a thinker, isn't it? It's not a kind of one that makes you laugh.
I mean, it's a very cohesive collection, isn't it? They're all there is a strong relationship that they're putting forward there. And I suppose with just 20 looks, it would be. But instantly, in your head, you sort of get an idea from seeing that, what the message is, really. I mean, I think it would be fantastic to see the actual garments.
Yes, it would actually.
Just see
because
the
I think
techniques.
the fabrics look very modern, and that's something you don't quite get on the camera, which is a shame.
Yeah.
This is incredible, what we're seeing in number 20.
Yeah.
It's interesting as well because I was speaking to Alex Fury about Schiaparelli because I wasn't mad on it and he really loved it.
Did he like it?
Yeah, he really, really liked it, and he said that he liked it because it was proposing something that was very new. And it was completely its own language, and it was completely different to everything else.
Was that this season?
This season,
I haven't seen it actually.
It's similar. It's a relatively similar kind of vibe to last season. And I kind of
slightly madder.
Yeah,
in a good
slightly
way.
madder.
You know, slightly eccentric.
But I get that about this, you know, I like it because it doesn't feel like any of the others. You know, it's doing its own thing.
You're absolutely right there, and that's very positive.
And that's nice because you think, but it also doesn't often, I think when something doesn't feel like the others, then it doesn't feel like it's quite couture because you get so used to kind of opulence, and if it doesn't look like a Disney princess frock, you're kind of like, oh, it's not couture, and it makes you a bit nostalgic. But this, it's not actually making me that nostalgic. It makes me nostalgic for a big presentation, but it makes me feel quite excited, which is good. I think something like 4 and the later ones that we were looking at, it does make you intrigued, which I guess is what couture is meant to do in a way, is make you intrigued about technique.
Yeah, and I think it's really pushing the technique there on something as light as a lace fabric, if it is, to have this very solid looking porthole. I imagine that technically that's quite difficult to achieve. This number 2 was interesting too, because it's all those layers and which
I think layers are,
and it's quite an unusual shape as well, especially for couture, which ends up being about body consciousness, just because clients often want to try and show off their figure.
Well, that kind of echoes a look that you have later on, which was that fur sweater type thing over a chiffon, which is quite interesting. But that goes back, I guess, to what we were talking about with different cultures buying couture and what's appropriate, because she's actually very covered up if you look at that, which is interesting. I'm quite seduced by it. I really like it.
It's interesting because there is a good mixture of wearable and then really unusual.
Yeah.
Which is good because it's kind of stayed true to his roots as well, in that he would put something.
Yeah. I think it's interesting, so that circular motif that we're seeing, even just in the kind of hem of things being rounded, there's a real softness to that, which is really, really lovely, which I think, you know, as we were saying before, it echoes what he was doing last season, but to have that contrasted with that really kind of like that very graphic pleat is quite interesting. I do think number 9 would be the big seller though, just because it's very easy. So does this make us intrigued for the future of couture? Does it make us want to see more from Hussein? How's this leaving us feeling?
Oh, I'd definitely like to see more from Hussein. See what else he's got, up his sleeve.
Yeah.
How about you, Shonagh? Has it got you excited to see Hussein?
Yeah, I think so. I think for me it's always so difficult to understand couture or Demi couture or something of this nature through an image. And I don't know if that's just the way that I work, and I think that's why exhibitions are
so important.
Lovely. Because you'll never understand, working with Valentino, I worked with images for months, and when they arrived it completely changed my opinion of these pieces. I hadn't seen them before. So I went to Rome and saw them, and then they came over and I changed my opinion again. So I think it's always so difficult for me to make an opinion, a personal opinion, from these images, because it's styling as well. I think is interesting. How you change on someone else, it could look amazing. And interesting though that the celebrity sort of pick up on this. I don't know. The first collection, was there a lot of celebs wearing it?
I didn't see it worn at all. It's really interesting actually. That's just made me question something. A lot of people talk about kind of the rise of the fashion exhibition after Savage Beauty, how important fashion exhibitions have become and how much more popular enthusiasm there is. Do you think that has something to do with kind of the popularisation of fashion on the web as well? Do you think people, because they see so many images of fashion, they actually want to see it up close as well? Do you think they're kind of I know they're very different ways of seeing fashion, do you think they're going hand in hand together? People see so much that it's making them actually like, well, I want to go and see some clothing in the flesh. Yeah,
I think you've got a more intelligent audience, but reading Exhibiting Fashion, little plug for Amy and Judith's book, which is brilliant, 1971 to now, starts with Cecil Beaton's exhibition, which Oriole know much more than me about, but Cecil Beaton, an anthology. It was his anthology. It was at the Vionnet, and he picked it, he designed it. They've always been a little showy. And I don't know if they're cyclical. We've become obsessed again, once again, and Doris Langley Moore would write incessantly about her exhibiting fashion. Diana Vreeland at the Met, she was a little, fire starter. She did such naughty things, and that was after her being at Vogue for many, many years. So I don't think it's new. I don't know, Oriole, I don't know if you want to follow that up.
I think it's just having such, I think as you were saying with an audience now, there's a much bigger informed audience because of the internet. So I think there is a much bigger appetite. I mean, everybody knows about fashion now, and I think that there is this thing, because you're looking remotely all the time, that idea that you can actually see the object up close.
Sure.
It makes it quite attractive.
I suppose in a similar way that a lot of people who are selling a lot on the internet, even if they only sell on the internet, they still like to maybe have one flagship store or something, somewhere you can go and look at the product.
Because I wonder if people, when they do see this online, whether they see it on websites, whether they see it sort of shared on social media, or whether it will make them question and want to go and see the pieces. I wonder how much you have that with your person who's not ever going to buy it, but whether the people are intrigued by the technique. It's something we're thinking about on some of the other discussions about kind of the two roles of couture. When it is modernising itself, one focus of that is to bring in new clients, but another focus perhaps is to get people excited about couture and get people. People are definitely excited about buying fashion, but are they excited about how it's made? And I think that's what you'd hope that people would see this and would want to know about that technique, and would then want to go and see pieces. And especially with old houses, you imagine that you want people to think, oh, I wonder what Vionnet is, maybe I'll look into it, maybe I'll go see. But do you think that process happens?
Yeah, I mean, I think sort of it's very hard to understand couture from a flat image. And I think a great example was the recent Gautier exhibition at the Barbican.
Yeah.
Every single garment, you suddenly thought, wow, you look around the back, all the details on that, everything was just fabulous. Where in a flat image it doesn't translate, much as Shonagh was saying about Valentino. I think it's maybe more so with ready to wear, it's easier to understand, but I think couture is in the actual object. But I think, I think this season, certainly, there has been this buzz and this push to kind of energise people about it, and so talking about a younger market. And hopefully with, this interest and more fashion exhibitions, that you do get this idea that people are intrigued about what makes it different, why is it different to ready to wear. And
but also I think it would be intriguing, I think, if you spoke to a lot of fashion students, they wouldn't, when they talk about their sort of planned career, they wouldn't say, I want to be a couturier. They would say, I want to have my own label, I want to work for McQueen, or whatever they would say. And it's interesting, you wonder if them seeing Hussein do this kind of thing makes them, he was at St Martin's not that long ago, maybe this is something that an area that I will end up working in. I think there were for a lot of years that perhaps, I know you had your McQueens at Givenchy, but perhaps couture just seemed like it was completely not going to be it was something on a career plan of a young designer.
Definitely wasn't fashionable in the 80s, I think.
Yeah.
I think obviously when McQueen went to Givenchy and Galliano went to Givenchy, that kind of focused young people on couture again a bit. And there's definitely been a resurgence now.
Do you see that? Do you see young people more applying?
Definitely.
That's exciting.
Interested in it, definitely.
Yeah.
And it's one of the reasons, for example, if they come and intern at McQueen, they want to understand about the techniques and how things are made and how things are done for clients as well. So I think that there is, of course there's going to be a much smaller demographic who want to go into couture, but that's as you would expect.
Yeah.
But we've definitely had people coming through who want to do that, and have then gone on to maybe work in sort of couture houses in Paris, be it Givenchy or Chanel or whatever.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
That's what I hope happens with Hussein. I hope it kind of inspires people to be more excited and interested.
And Margiela, a lot of the young designers coming through have been very excited about that.
Yeah.
One girl who worked with us has gone to Margiela on an internship and is loving it. So
it's exciting.
Yeah.
Well, that's good. Have we enjoyed couture season then? This, you just mentioned it. This kind of push to make people think of it as relevant, but it's makes me feel happy that people, they're trying hard, aren't they? Which is good. The houses, they're trying to make people buy into it and be excited.
Yeah, and it's exciting to see new faces, and with Schiaparelli, with this, love them or hate them, they are definitely shaking it up. I think to see some new people on the scene,
and that's great for everybody.
Yeah. Well, should we give Hussein a clap, and a clap for everyone to round things off, because it's our last panel. Goodbye, couture. Au revoir.